Hello, Starseeds and magical friends, and welcome back to the Truth, Beauty, Freedom, and Love show. Welcome to the show. I am your host, Rachel Z, and I'm here with a very special guest, Larry from Decriminalize Nature. We are going to go into stories of being, I'm going to call it like Earth Warrior stories that just came to the top of my head, and also stories that have influenced you in your childhood, past lives, anything across the board, because stories, those who tell the stories do rule the world. And so let's take the power back in our stories. And that's what this show is all about. So Larry is the astro stack right now that we have, because as you guys know, I relate our astrology blueprint to what our superhero identity is in this realm. So Larry's a Scorpio, which I find quite fitting, with a Libra moon, also fitting, I think, as well, because we are in Libra season and we're having a sense of justice, I think, activated in all of us right now. But Larry, you're going to have that close to your emotional state of like having justice and truth at the core of everything. And being an Aries rising, it means that you're kind of born here to be a warrior and, initiate things. So that's a great astro stack to have. So I will throw to you, Larry, to give us your introduction as you see it so far. Welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for inviting me on. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, and so I imagine this conversation is going to be wonderful. You always bring in the fun, magical elements.
Oh yes,
that you
let's go into the
woo. In other
woo.
places. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Per my Scorpio, I'll get into the mystery and the depths with no problem. So let's dive in and go deep. Love conversations around consciousness. I'm originally from Michigan area, not too far outside of where you're at, outside Detroit area. Spent a lot of time there. I did a lot of, Michigan is not well known for all of its nature and natural beauty, but it's surrounded by lakes and it has lots of forests and all these different types of things. So I really spent a lot of time in nature and around the water when I was younger, which was great. Kind of, helped me sort of learn about life, so to speak. And then went to school at the University of Michigan. Actually studied neuroscience, or it was called biopsychology and cognitive science at the time before neuroscience technically existed. So that's kind of how young we are still in this realm, which is kind of amazing. Was having some mushroom experiences at the same time, and was very frustrated that I was going to this, so-called prestigious university, and then didn't know anything about the inner experience. It talk about what's going on in the brain. It talks about the neuroscience, but when you talk about like, hey, I had this very strange and profound, otherworldly, multi-dimensional, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, type experience, sacred experience, there's no context for that. It was always drugs of abuse, brain and behavior, or let's do this animal research, or let's count these dots, or let's do this fMRI and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't really about these inner experiences. So I had sort of a little bit of a crisis of identity, so to speak. And
how old were you when that happened?
Just about 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, around that time frame,
Okay.
And so this is like 94 to 98, basically. And then I had to do some animal research for my classes, but I'm also doing my mushroom experiences. So, I would go do some mushroom experiences. The next morning I have to, quote unquote, I'm calling it torturing, but, they would say it's science, right?
Wow.
But do that in the morning. And it was just kind of a hard thing, of realizing like, oh, I'm not set for animal
the psyche
research,
of all that and having to like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I got really interested in kind of the inner experience of qualitative nature. Obviously, my psychedelic experiences were pretty profound. Did a long road trip around the U.S. Actually went to visit a bunch of professors and other people around the U.S. that were doing this research, but they were kind of hiding it behind other research. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take a little break and moved to Hawaii. So I spent about 11 years in Hawaii and Maui, which was really great.
I didn't know that.
Really cool. Yeah. So it's nice to go from Detroit area, which was very much, even though there was a lot of nature, still industry and still kind of car town, and kind of
Detroit,
like, you forget that you have a body. Yeah, exactly. You're covered up. And then going to Hawaii, we're all of a sudden like, oh, okay, I can be in the water all the time. There's bamboo forests. There's these craters. You swim with dolphins and swim with whales, and like, oh yeah, wait, I have this thing that's connected to the earth in a different kind of way than just like thinking about it, seeing and observing it, but actually feeling and being a part of it. And so that was really, really profound for me. Those 11 years were very, I think, important in my sort of development as well. Unfortunately, the town that I lived in burned down a couple years ago, Lahaina, or was it about a year and a half ago now? So that was pretty sad. A lot of folks that are out there, I know some folks that lost a lot of their stuff, had to, figure something out. And all the places that I lived, all the places I worked at, all the places that I knew are gone now. So it was a different kind of grieving when that happens. It's not, it's like you can grieve a person, you can grieve it on a timeline, but when you're grieving a place, the timeline is like all over the place. Like, oh, I remember doing this thing over here. And so I was trying to watch myself capture moments in time, thinking that they
Yeah.
would slip away because that I can't go back to that location and reaccess those memories. So,
That's
so that was a little bit of a bummer that happened. And of course, wasn't well, well taken care of. I'm sure Oprah and The Rock,
oh my gosh, that
fundraised
was
a lot of money,
so
nobody that nobody got any of it.
cringy.
So that's how yeah, exactly. Yeah. So unfortunately, that's the people there are still hurting and suffering. But yeah, I eventually moved back from Hawaii to the mainland in 2009.
Mm.
While I was there, I was came across ayahuasca, which is very interesting to me. Went down to
Mm.
Brazil a few times to study that. And then I was like, yeah, I'm very fascinated by this experience. It was different than my mushroom experiences, which I was able to sort of say my mushroom experiences, or at least coming from a neuroscience mind or a cognitive psych mind, I was able to say, oh, this is just my higher consciousness. But we still don't know what it is. It's still beyond everything we're talking about, but it's part of me on a different level. Ayahuasca, and I've said this on a few other podcasts, ayahuasca forced me to have to recognize or at least address the idea or the sensation of plant teacher, plant guide, plant spirit, that
Mm.
this is a conversation I'm having. It's not just my higher self. It's that I'm in a relationship with this plant. And what does that mean? What are the implications of that for understanding of consciousness, of understanding the nature of reality, of our understanding of what plants are and animals are and humans are anyway, so that was really fascinating. I
Would you
went back to
sorry
San
to
Francisco.
sorry to break in, just to ask a quick question about how your ayahuasca experience differed from your mushroom experience, because I consider both of those to be like, of the earth, right? But
Mm.
what you've said about Aya is similar to you have like almost like that jungle earthy consciousness self, and would you say mushies are more of almost like could you explain like maybe the differentiation between those two
Yeah,
experiences?
yeah, totally. And this has been kind of a back and forth. The mushrooms feel more playful, and they know where your edges and they'll take you to it, and maybe they're a little trickstery, and maybe
Yeah.
they're decomposers, so they're going to decompose stuff. Oftentimes you're not going to be out and about and doing stuff, but neither with ayahuasca either. But like that was kind of my sense, playful, childlike,
Yeah.
but deep,
Useful. Yeah.
and yeah, exactly. But still, very visual for me and very, very interesting. And like I said, really expanded my understanding of consciousness, which pre my mushroom experiences was that consciousness exists right in this little area. So I'm so happy I don't think that anymore. And I
Yeah.
think about that all the time with the policy. How many people live their lives thinking that it's just like, whoop, that's just it right here,
Yeah.
and like just that alone, forget all the mental health, forget everything else, just that alone, the idea that there is more to consciousness and we have the right to be able to explore that is healing aside, that's an important human right, just to understand what it's like to be a human being with consciousness. So anyway, so
Yeah.
that's mushrooms. Then when it came to ayahuasca was like much deeper,
Yeah.
had a, I don't want to say more wisdom because I don't want to like try
Mm.
and compare in that regard, but it felt like there was more of like a little less playful and more like, hey, you got to do some work here. Like I had I think my fourth ayahuasca experience was this beautiful, I always think about this as like, this beautiful crystalline transparent castle where like all the elders and
Yeah.
the teachers were
Yeah.
a huge festival and everyone was like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And then like the experience was over and it's like, okay, now you've seen it, now get to work. And then it was just like for the next like 20 or 30 experiences like deep work and just grinding and grinding and grinding, and going to all these spaces. And
That
we can
vision
talk
though
about
you
that a little bit.
have of like a party, like a really like awesome, the most amazing etheric party that's like waiting for you if we can just like figure out everything is
Right.
I've had that one.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's like the draw to keep doing your work because you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I want to go back there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I do this hard work now. Okay, so but one thing about the ayahuasca was that it definitely was. It felt like there was, like I said, this things that I never even imagined were coming into my mind, places and
Mm.
visions I could never even expected were coming up. So there's like the sense of like, okay, I'm in this dialogue now. What's interesting, and now knowing a little bit more about mushrooms, it's not surprising because mushrooms are chemically like a little ayahuasca factory.
Mm.
While they have, I mean,
I like that
it's a minor
description. I like that description.
Yeah, it's like a minor amount because they have the tryptamines and they have the beta carbolines. So that's what's with ayahuasca, you have the DMT and the MAOI. So you have the same sort of system. Again, it's not quite as pronounced as it is with ayahuasca. But what I found with my mushroom experiences now is that, remember what I said before, they kind of know where your edges are.
Yes, yeah.
And
They know you. So it's kind of like
ayahuasca blows out your edges. You know, it's like you have no more edges, or the edges are like way out there now, right? And so now the mushrooms are like, oh, you know about that spot? All right, let's go. So sometimes my mushroom experiences now are like, am I having an ayahuasca experience? Super fractally, super otherworldly, super out there, you know, things that I wouldn't have expected from my previous mushroom experiences if I hadn't had the ayahuasca experience.
It's almost
so
like
now my mushroom
like Aya pushed out your etheric map more, right? And so much
right,
it's like,
exactly,
oh, like now
exactly.
you have like that like groundwork. Now I can like take you on the path on some like some journeys and some missions in these terrains now that you've discovered them.
Exactly, little side quests, things like that. Exactly,
Yeah, I
yeah,
love that.
yeah. So that's kind of was really fascinating to me, and watching people have these like, you know, sudden shifts of you know, personality, of paradigm, of narrative, that type of thing. And so I went to California Institute of Medical Study to do some more research. I got the currency scholarship at some point in time, which was you know, doing entheogenic research. So I went down to Brazil. I was working with Luis Eduardo Luna, who's done a lot of work with Pablo Maringo and Terence McKenna and all those folks back in the day. Still doing a lot of good work down there as a consciousness center down there. And so he, you know, he and I worked together, and we just basically went through these, like, you know, hundreds of experience reports and trying to figure out what types of experiences people are sort of engaging in. And that was really fascinating to me, just kind of get a sense, because I also do integration work, which is like helping people back when they have a big, strong paradigm shattering experience. What do you do with it? How do you deal with that information? How do you handle it? How do you rebuild a new paradigm, et cetera, et cetera?
Great. So those are super important questions, Larry. I think
and not just for these, like, we're also in a paradigm shattering cultural moment right now.
Yeah.
And so I think those tools are useful all across the board. Because what do you do when you no longer, everything you believed in is gone, or everything you knew was a lie, or every story you've been told has been some sort of agenda, or it's propaganda,
hurts,
or whatever else.
Truth really, really hurts sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And so sometimes it's good to just like figure out, okay, where do you start? Where do you start when there's no more ground? Where do you start when you're flailing? You know, and that's kind of what I was trying to focus on there. Also, in that time, I created an organization called Entheogenic Research, Integration, and Education, which is doing like peer integration circles, which is basically like storytelling, narrative building, sharing your experiences. Such a beautiful, profound experience for me, because it's like, you know, if we believe that what people are sharing in their stories is their snapshot of consciousness, then we're constantly getting a larger, again, expanding our view of what is, what's out there, what's possible. You know, I mean, and if we believe that there is something as a unit of consciousness, or a collective unconscious, if you will, or an accessible area of archetypes, then we should be able to all go to the same places. And if we figure out how to sort of navigate, then we can help each other find our way around the space that seems unnavigable right now.
Yeah, no, you are. So oh my gosh, you're like that. The sharing of stories thing is so key. I'm so like happy that you. So do you still have those sharing circles?
Yeah, we do. I mean, once COVID happened, we were doing them more online because we lost the space that we were, you know, doing them here. But yeah, we still do those, you know, monthly, and then I still do one-on-one stuff, and then we're just looking at a spot around here to do it in person. It's much easier to do in person than online anyway, because there's so much stuff with tech. You know, it's nice that we can connect from Toronto to the Bay Area, but at the same time, I would much rather be in person, and you get to feel the person differently. You get to see, oh, they're tapping their foot, maybe they're uncomfortable, or this, you know, all the different cues that you don't see in this little box, two-dimensional box that we're in right now, come more clear. People are coming out of those things, and, you know, when we were doing this in 2011, you know, it's still kind of poo-pooed a little bit, like, oh, it's just people's egos talking. But I watched so many people come together, connect with each other, and friendships built off of this. And, you know, then I started to help do workshop and train people all around, trying to do peer integration circles. So now you see peer integration circles everywhere. You see integration as like a major component to all policy and everything like that, which is great. And then in 2019, I co-founded Decriminalize Nature with a bunch of other folks. And then from there, you know, we passed in Oakland, California in 2019. And since then, I think 26 or 27 cities and counties across the U.S. Have passed similar policy. We had a pretty strong influence on all that, including influence on some of the statewide policy. We're going to be trying to help out in Canada. And if any of your listeners out there want to do anything regarding public policy,
join us. Come join the fight. Yeah.
Exactly. we'd love to help out. And the larger our community is, the better it is, because there's a lot of folks out there that are ally adjacent. Like they want to really go on a hardcore medicalization framework. Okay, well,
Yes.
medicalization means $22,000 price tag, or it means you have to sit with a doctor in a doctor's office while they're taking notes and recording you, and you're getting that information is kept on file. And who wants to have their trip on file with the state? Like, I'm sorry, but
Yeah, no,
that's a big no for me.
oh my gosh. Okay, you just opened the door into like a wonderful topic because like I am in Canada, right? And like as you can see, I love mushrooms. They're my background. I owe the mushies a lot. I was in the corporate world for a very long time. My husband is my shaman. We do like epic heroic dose mushroom trips, and in there I discovered that like as you said, the shattering of your paradigm, right? And then working in the corporate world and being like, I literally can't do this anymore. Like you can't pretend, and the mask doesn't fit anymore. Just I can't do this anymore. But in Canada, I wanted to talk about the languaging of things. And when I first reached out to you to work with you for Decrim Nature, is that the big thing that resonated with me was uh, using words like entheogen, the concept of decriminalizing nature as opposed to legalizing. Because in Canada, we have legalized marijuana, but what that's done is actually I feel like it's become worse. Because it's now like I literally on my street have 3 government weed shops, and I go to none of them. I go to the unlicensed one
Right.
because they don't
Good.
they have dosing limits, right? So the edibles can't be more than 10 milligrams, I think, per serving. And so it's
Mhm.
just kind of like, so people, the nuance between legalization and decriminalization, can you explain that a little bit in terms of
Yeah, sure.
how you came to it?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. We'll go entheogen psychedelic, then we'll go decrim and
Yes,
legalization.
yes.
Before you go into that, I want to touch on something that I've been seeing going around Twitter. I don't know, Twitter X, whatever, last
Whatever
couple
that
days. I think
is.
it's hilarious because it taps into exactly what you were talking about a moment ago about paradigm shattering and being in one sort of situation and then realizing like, oh yeah, I got to figure something out here.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's again, here's 2 different paradigms seeing exactly the same thing in two different ways. So the response was there's a whole bunch of venture capitalists right now who are like, oh, my venture capitalist friend went and did ayahuasca, and they realized what they were doing wasn't in integrity, and then they stopped doing what VC work, and now they're just like taking to their mind being lazy and taking time off and being with themselves and blah, blah, blah. And
Ah.
so you have the same story, which is like VC person quits VC job because of ayahuasca. The psychedelic and entheogenic people are like, yes, it's doing what
Yay!
it's supposed to be doing. The VC person is like, no, this is horrible, this is the worst thing ever. So
Productivity. We're not. What's going on? They're like,
productivity is going down. No. So it's really funny to see this dynamic where you
that's
have,
so
again,
funny.
2 paradigms talking about the same thing, and their view of it is totally different. Where some people say,
Perspective.
yes,
Yeah.
supposed to be happening, and we're talking about mental health. What they're actually doing is taking care of their mental health in a lot of these situations.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that they're doing these things, and the other person's like, no, mental health. We just got to do the VC thing. We got to, I don't even know the jargon and the terms for that, but do our thing or whatever that is. So it's just kind of funny to see that. But that was just kind of a little side note
That's
because I think
funny.
as we're going into this space where there's a lot of, there's this guy named Gene Gebser, who is out of a philosopher out of Germany, and he talks about these mutations of consciousness over time. So it's not an evolution of consciousness because we don't know if the next one's going to be better or worse than the
Mm-hmm.
previous one. So we can't say that this we're coming into is going to be, oh, this is the best version because it's closer to where we are now. But he does say it's a mutation. There's a shift in consciousness. So he goes through. He kind of mapped it over time. And he's like, and there's an archaic mutation of consciousness, which is like you are the one. Then there's a magic mutation of consciousness, which is like you're engaging with nature to make magical things happen,
Yeah.
right? Then there's the mythic layer of consciousness, which is you're telling stories about the magical person who does things in nature to make things happen that are magical. Then you have the mental stage of consciousness, which is where we're at right now, which is we have to measure the myth or the magic, and if it doesn't measure, it doesn't exist, right? And then now he's saying we're going into this integral state where all these different
That's
mutations of consciousness will come together in one space and try and figure out how to commingle. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. We're in this very interesting space. It's
that's
probably,
the way that
I'm
you
sure you're
explain that.
astronomical.
The way you explain that is like
Yes.
I love that. That just like whew, that resonated hard. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And then we're in this astronomically, we're in this very unusual time, very similar to, from what I understand, the counterculture era of the 60s and civil rights movement. Everything else is kind of the same, stars in the sky and everything that's going on, et cetera, et cetera. You know the word better than I do in that, but
Yeah.
from what I understand,
Including the
we're in a
fall of
similar time
Rome,
frame. So,
right? Fall of Rome is also, we're also in that same kind of cosmological, like,
yeah, it's right. It's like
degradation of
I saw
society.
some meme out there or something like, oh, when somebody said, how are you preparing for fall? I thought they meant of civilization and not autumn. How are you preparing for the fall? Oh,
The
I got some
fall.
pumpkins. No, I'm preparing.
No, the fall.
The fall.
It's the fall. But it's
Capital THE.
yeah, no, but like it's crazy how you mentioned the idea of almost like these like spheres of, because everything's a model, right? I feel like that's where sometimes people can sometimes get caught up, and that's why I love like your whole like peer sharing circles, because in archetypes, in symbolism, in like story, we're able to talk about ineffable things, because like I can't make a PowerPoint presentation to show you like the dimensions of reality and how those actually are like seen and how you would traverse them.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to I guess the difference in like languaging, right, between like when you created how long has Decriminalize Nature been around?
Yeah, so we started in 2019, and we had a really lot of. I mean, technically we started in 2018, but 2019 was when we were like kind of, it was December 2018, January 2019. But we had a lot of conversation around exactly what you're saying: narratives, words, realizing that language creates reality.
Mm-hmm.
How are we planning on creating our reality? Even I'm hearing people say things like, "Oh, is this protected by law?" Like, it's not. No, it's not. We're not asking any law to protect us. We're asking for our rights and our human rights to be a human being. We don't need any protection of law. We need them to stop arresting, right? So anyway, so we had a lot of conversations around the languaging and what to use. One thing we decided upon was talking about entheogen versus psychedelic.
Yep.
Psychedelic, which kind of spoke to this like era of time, the 1960s, 1970s. It was culture and music and art, but you really wouldn't call an ayahuasca ceremony or a iboga ceremony psychedelic. So there's a group of anthropologists named Rupp and other folks that came up with this other term, which was really meant to sort of speak to this larger continuum of these experiences that wasn't so Western, San Francisco Bay Area, 60s cultural kind of movement, that type of thing. So they came up with the word entheogen, which, there's a lot of people that are describing it, but basically on base level, it means generating the divine within, or possessed by inspiration or enthusiasm. Like, all these are kind of from the same idea of the thing that's coming from the inside that we can sort of tap into, or this inner experience. Oftentimes it also speaks to the idea of plants and mushrooms more so than synthetics. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong. You can make some good arguments that synthetics are also entheogenic, but typically entheogen comes with the history of practice.
Yeah.
It comes with traditions that have been working. You have your DMTs, you have your snuffs, you have your ayahuascas, you have your cacti, you have your mushrooms, and these different types of things, your ibogas. Those are kind of all entheogenic plants and fungi as far as how we see it. So initially I was like, my other organization is called Entheogenic Research, Integration, Education. People don't know what the word means really. People are going to stumble over it, pronounce it wrong. I'm coming from 10 years of baggage of having to like try and bring this word out in the world, and
try to make entheogen happen.
Right. But now everyone's like, no, let's do it, because and rightly so. I'd rather spend 2 minutes redefining what entheogen means than spend all the time it takes to unpack 60 years of baggage that comes with psychedelic. Because no matter what, no matter who you are, if you hear the term psychedelic, an image pops up, a vision of something pops up. You have maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, whatever it is. There's something there. So we wanted a chance to like start from scratch.
I love that.
And most people didn't know what entheogen means. Now it's kind of funny to see like in public policy all over the U.S. newscasters talking about it, city council members talking about it, law enforcement talking about it.
You've made it real.
Spirit of I mean, it was real, but now it's like it's coming out, and to even see, for example, and I know, like I was saying earlier, people have sometimes trouble pronouncing it, like, oh, they read it wrong,
entheogen.
So even, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but even like newscasters, and I think for me, it's like, oh, it's psychedelic is trying to come out of their mouth, but they're forced to say this new word and they stumble on it because it's not really that difficult of a word, but yet all of a sudden it's hear a stumble, I always think, okay, that's the baggage of psychedelic trying to make its way out. So that's with entheogen and psychedelic. On the decrim and legalization, that's a whole other thing too. And you make a good point, which is like, a lot of people say that legalization is basically prohibition light. Is like, if
Yeah.
you pay the state for your license fees and you're within this box, you're okay. But if you're doing it any other way, you're growing your own at home, no, that's not allowed. We can't have that. We need you to go through this authority figure. Why do I need a license? Why do I need to go to this authority figure to grow a plant? We've been growing plants since the beginning of time, or mushrooms since the beginning of time. Like, why all of a sudden now do I have to be okayed by you in order to partake in my human rights? So we said, hey, let's really get at the base level here. All that stuff's going to happen. Those people with all the money are going to try and make things legalized. They're going to try and do whatever they're going to do. As we see in Oregon, we see in Colorado. Oregon model is way expensive. The Colorado legalization model, decrim model is great there. The Colorado legalization model is also going to be expensive. That's $3,000 to $5,000 for a single experience. Think about how many mushrooms you could buy or grow with. And then the MDMA trials that didn't make it through FDA with MAPS, that was going to be $22,000 for an experience. Like, imagine how much MDMA you can get for $22,000.
Insane to me.
So,
how do you come up with those numbers though? Like, how does one determine the value of? Well, I mean, like, it's infinite. You can't like.
Right. Yeah. So for Oregon, it's like based upon hourly for two people plus
okay.
things, plus licensing fees, plus registration, all that kind of stuff. On the medical level, it's probably the same thing on 22 grand, but now you're having to deal with two doctors, which have a higher per hour, and you're looking at
billable rate for each
12 hours plus pre and of course, they wanted to like tap on every different possibility to make you say, oh yeah, we need to pay more, but at the end of the day, it's like it's taking it away from people. Who even insurance, who's going to charge 22 grand? You have to have like a very strong treatment resistant situation for insurance to be thrown out a 22 grand price tag for an 8-hour session, basically. Right. So we were like, hey, okay, let's do something different. Let's remove the criminal penalties. Let's make sure that people are able to engage in their own. And we talked about that too, is like nature can't be patented. So, while they're trying to patent these synthetic chemicals and things like that, you probably know this from the pharmaceutical world you're in, you can't really patent nature. So we're like, okay, well, how do we get ahead of these companies which are already trying to patent things? And, some companies were even going as far as like throwing spaghetti on the wall and saying, okay, if you're holding hands, that's part of our claim. If you're on a couch, that's part of the claim. If you use music, that's part of the claim. It's like, wow. And there's one person that like actually did patent it. I think it actually went through mixing cannabis and mushrooms. It's like, wow, there's no prior art to that. I'm sure like people have been doing that for centuries. You know what I mean? So anyway, so that's the problem when it comes to anything that's publicly traded. You got to have your IP. You got to do all that kind of stuff. And then once you start doing that, it's to the whims of, the capitalist system. And, the person tries to do things that are good to people, but not necessarily for the good of healing. They could get dropped off because, their shareholders want profit, et cetera, investors want profit. So that becomes problematic. So anyway, that's going to be delayed for a while because the FDA trials didn't make it for a variety of reasons, including the fact that the FDA naturally can't measure these things. And so, there's always going to be placebo issues. There's always going to be expectancy issues. The issues around variability with therapists, and these different types of things. So, but in the meantime, we know for thousands and thousands of years, people have been doing these safely and responsibly. I think the RAND report, there's some RAND Corporation did a report, and they said I think close to 8 million people had a mushroom experience last year, and of those people, 50% of them didn't pay for it at all, or they grew for their own. So from the perspective of people who are like, oh, I'm going to roll in here and make my cannabis billions, it's not going to happen, especially because now everyone's learning how to grow. And now there's probably 10,000 more people that are growing mushrooms in Oakland than ever were before, and that trickles out because one person can grow way more than you can ingest in a year. That you want to. No one's eating two ounces of mushrooms a year or 3 ounces of mushrooms, or whatever. Because it's, if you're doing it right and you're having these big experiences, you're going to take a little break.
You need to take time in between the heroic journeys. You definitely do integration, like real, and sifting through all of that, right? And so I feel like all the medical model stuff doesn't deal, as you were saying, like the mystical stuff, the woo-woo stuff, the magical things. Like I read a book once that basically talked about how, in all of our fictional tales and all of our mythos is a truth, right? So it's how we can speak about real truths without, flagging the powers that are in, that's what I call it in terms of that. But I feel like when we're talking about legalization versus decriminalization, it's like we don't want to be punished for exploring our own consciousness. And so here in Canada, I feel like it's a little bit of a tricky situation when we talk about the medical model, because I used to work in the hospital, I used to work with pharma, and it's like if you aren't licensed and you're not doing it in our way, we will punish you for it, even though you're trying to like it. So it's this very it's tough, right? So, but then at the same time, you don't want necessarily people doing heroic doses of mushrooms without being aware of what they could be in for, right? And things coming up, and like the idea of a bad trip and all of those kinds of things. Have you seen that in terms of like your peer stories of people doing really epic doses and then like having a really hard time coming back to real life?
I mean, I think that's what's interesting about this is that, there are more people at some rock concert or festival this weekend than there were in all the people that have done the clinical trials.
Yeah.
And yet we're all concerned about somebody having a bad trip. Millions, 8 million people.
That's a great point.
Had a mushroom trip last year. And maybe 3 had, maybe a hand. Okay, bad trips happen, yes, of course, or challenging trips or however you want to call them. But at the same time, like, how we all learned, there's no true informed consent with this. Yeah. We're talking about a re-look at consciousness. We're talking about an expansion that you can't be aware of without knowing and having had it, So, millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people have kind of just, okay, I'm going to try it out, And so, yes, go low, go slow, figure your way out, But I and other friends of mine have been like, oh, well, the dose is a bag. So whatever's in that bag is 1 dose. And I have friends that had 7-gram quarter bag, and they're like, oh, because they think it's 1 dose, or so those different types of things, they're gonna have a bigger experience. But I think in terms of like difficult or challenging trips, that's where integration really comes into play. You can't, anyone can have, no matter how prepared you are, anyone can have a different, but the idea is like, okay, how do I breathe into this while I'm having it, realizing this will be over in a few hours, and that who do I get to support me afterwards or help me out afterwards during the experience, in a way. While there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I want to sit for somebody, all that kind of thing. And that's good, and maybe, I'm kind of laissez-faire in terms of my sitting approach. What I'm saying? Like, I'm more of a sitter, as in like, you need any water? How's the music? Don't bump your head. Light okay? You're good? And I'm out of it, and that person's having their own experience with that. You have these other people who are like, oh, well, we need to do psychotherapy with the person while they're doing this. It's like, no, you don't know what the person is going through. You take a note at the wrong time, or you say a word the wrong way, that person's going to spin out because you aren't inside and influence it. That's where this whole thing of hypersuggestibility comes in. You look at all the weird stuff that went on with the CIA and MK Ultra and all that kind of stuff, where they're kind of tapping into this hypersuggestibility issue, saying, "Oh, can we do this for brainwashing or other different types of things like that?" Like, of course, they weren't able to find much results for that. Luckily, they were finding that it didn't really help soldiers too much. They wanted to hug trees instead of shooting people. Same thing with the PCs, right? The soldier person, they're like, "Oh, this is the worst." It's turning people into peaceful hippies.
You know what, though? That brings up a good question that I thought about. Just what is your thought on the idea of like when you solo trip versus like when you're doing a group trip? Because like myself and my husband we trip together, right? And so like we've actually you travel to those same realms together, and then like you experience things like telepathy and like what that means. And so I mean, that being said, though, you don't think people have different, let's call them belts, like entheogenic or like psychedelic belts, in terms of how far you've kind of gone. And so I feel like sometimes in like a group setting, if you have people of different levels partaking in like, and they don't know where their thresholds are, like you can have like a group, like just go with that. Like how do you feel in terms of like solo tripping versus like group tripping, and like do you have any thoughts in terms of like, do you prefer one way or another? I guess like everything has its place, I think, ultimately. But yeah, thoughts on that, group tripping versus solo tripping?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and there's different levels of groups too,
Yeah,
so
100%. Yeah.
So I personally, because this is how I learned my own self, very much into a solo trip or one other person trip. I was very lucky to have my first trip person was, I don't know how she was, 19 years old, and she also 19, and she just knew about the inner world. Everyone else I knew that was doing mushrooms was out oh, let's go to this thing, let's go to this thing. She's like, no, 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 you sit and you close your eyes. Like, what? You do what? Like, just sit and close your eyes. And her name was
Oh.
Phoenix, which is a great name for the person that's really showing you how to do your initial trip,
Oh, I
right?
love
Sort of
that.
this, right? So,
That's literally that's like your superhero origin story, Clary. Like a
yeah,
phoenix came
sure.
to you.
Yeah,
Like,
so thanks, Phoenix, if you're out there
oh
listening.
man, I
Appreciate it.
love
So,
that.
yeah, so that was really great, and I think for me, really a good way to sort of tap into sort of these initial experiences. But that we would have strange experiences, the two of us, or just doing by myself, the same sort of thing. It's like you have a different, more sort of intimate, sort of experience. And I've had some really really powerful and profound, like you say, telepathy. Or
Yeah.
I had one partner one time that we were doing we were journeying, and we were having, like, as a tail end of our journey, we were doing an eye gazing thing. And so while we were doing this, we it was like, for me, and she said this too, for her, like, here's my shirt saying, it's
Oh no,
not
it's a
complicated, it's just
perfect.
consciousness,
Yeah, I
right?
know.
It's
Perfect while you're
still
telling the
complicated, it's
story,
still
actually.
complicated, right? So we're looking at each other, and on each side of her head, the environment, we would, like, you feel like a drop in my belly, and then the environment would shift, and it'd be like, oh, this is us doing the same thing in this other world. And then
You guys are like dimension
environment, which,
jumping, and you had like a little bubble.
infinite. Yeah, exactly. So what is going on when we're exploring that? Is that possible? Like, what's happening there? And people, a lot of the folks out of Detroit, the Clindy EE community, they do a lot of work with really large doses of mushrooms, but they do it for astral travel. They do it for reading ancient sacred texts. He believed that the hieroglyphics were not supposed to be seen with two-dimensional eyes; they were meant to see through mushroom eyes, or other type of sort of entheogenic, visionary eyes, so to speak. So that's all the things we can do when you can focus on consciousness and exploration, that type of thing. Now, that's kind of on a smaller group scale. Then there's like the sort of medium group size, which is like, okay, you have, a handful of folks, and those would be maybe, fun for, like, sometimes mini journeys, by mushrooms, or sometimes with ayahuasca. You usually have these sort of smaller groups of 10 some people, or whatever, usually in a dark room. With mushroom journeys, sometimes I find that it doesn't quite flow as well as with the ayahuasca journeys. I think because there's such a ritual that's usually set up around the ayahuasca,
the drumming and
with there's
the Icaros,
the drumming, and all the soplatos, all the things that happen with that. But I tell you what, the first time for me, one of the biggest things about group setting in that regard was, okay, yeah, I wasn't so worried about, like, quote unquote, going too far, because it's like, okay, it's dark and I can just lay on my mattress. I've, had enough experiences where I know how to do that, right?
Yeah.
For me, the hardest part was navigating the nausea.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I'm a big guy, and I'm not supposed to be throwing up or getting sick, and the kind of stories against stories that we tell ourselves, right? Like, I can't be the one to be
But of course, then you'll get
sick
sick as a result of that.
Right, sure. Or what would happen, what I found was that I would, like, leave the room to go to the restroom
Oh, okay.
to take care of what I need to do, and then come back. Well, what happens when you do that is it breaks your trip. You're journeying, you're on a journey, you have to open your eyes, find your way to the bathroom, do your thing, find your way back, and where you're at is gone. The first time I actually, purged, in the group setting, was super powerful. Because I was able to really kind of go, like, use that nausea to kind of, like, take me further and further out into the sort of the realms, right? And I didn't have to leave and interrupt it, so I could kind of get right up to the edge there. And also just the sense of relief and the release that happens, and feeling like everyone in the room was like, it's okay, like, we're all healing
accepted
here. We're
it's
hearing
fine.
somebody else on the other side of the room. Yeah, somebody else on the other side of the room that's purging, and feeling like, okay, wow, they really got through something there. This sense of
that's
purge,
like almost like a purge of
is
shame, right? You're purging out, like, the shame of doing that in front of people, and so, like, for that to be like accepted, it's just like, hey, it's actually okay. Like, we're human beings, so
right, exactly.
It happens.
Exactly. So yeah, so that's like a mid-range group setting, which I think is good, and has some value to it. I mean, obviously, as with anything, you might have somebody that's having a difficult journey, or someone that's having a really difficult journey, and so that's going to, like, kind of need into your journey. But again, then you really see it as, like, everyone's healing together, and there's more of a camaraderie. I can't tell you how many ayahuasca experiences I've been to where you don't know anybody, and you come out of it best friends in like 8 hours. It's like, what happened, right?
Bonded.
Right, exactly. And then you have some more of the kind of the church style settings, which I haven't really been to official church, but I have been to a lot of, like, kind of adjacent settings to that, or 40 people, 50 people type things. And that's a little bit more, I mean, I don't mind it, because again, almost you have this sort of you're back to being anonymous again, because there's so many people there that you can do your thing and no one's really gonna probably notice it. But the energy of the circle is different, and you can find yourself caught in like little vortexes in the corner, and all of a sudden you're dealing with like 40 people's stuff, because you just happen to be in the wrong space in the room, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, all right, this is getting big.
Well, I look at that almost like as like raves too, right? Like big raves where if people are all taking whatever you're taking, right? So I look as like each of the substances are almost like they're keys to different universes, right? So you have like almost like all of these kind of worlds bumping into each other, and so it can be a bit hectic. What you said about like mini vortexes, I was like, that's a great way to describe it, right? Because we're mini universes, and so as we like collide with others, it can create like I think like it's not to say you want to control everything, but it's very difficult to have I feel like a large setting like that unless it's like ritualized, perhaps. Like I think some of those like were some of them like Santo Daime at all, or
I mean, there one was Santo Daime adjacent. You know what I'm saying? They weren't Santo Daime, but they were doing something similar.
That's an official church,
sort of similar approaches and ritual. Right. Yeah. So I agree in terms of raves or festivals. I mean, coming outside Detroit, there's a lot of pretty amazing party scenes. Obviously, Detroit techno is a big part of my younger years as well. So a lot of like Detroit parties where no one, you get there and it's so different than here in the Bay Area, right? In Detroit, you wore like a black hoodie and you got to your place, and then you dance all here. Here's like colorful, flamboyant. Everyone's got all this stuff going on. It's like no one would do that in Detroit, because they're just like, all right, get to the party, and then we're gonna, and then no one would leave the party at night, because no one wanted to be walking around Detroit at 3-4 in the morning. So everyone would stay till sunrise. So that was kind of a nice situation. But definitely agree. Like some places like Burning Man, I mean, that's a lot of people to be having a journey at the same time, and everyone's doing it at different places and that type of thing. And I had some really strange trips strange trips at Burning Man too, where almost like I visualized it as like the spiral, and like every walk around, you never can do
you're
the
on like
same
a different
place,
you're a different level like, of like wherever you
finding new areas. Right?
That's a cool way to look at
it. So that's like a whole other level. 80,000 people versus just you yourself. There's going to be some differences, of course, but I if I had a choice, it would be myself or maybe with one other person. To have a journey, but that's kind of my preference.
Yeah, definitely. I realize that we are almost at time of this show, Larry. I'm going to have you on the show again for a follow-up, I think, actually, because I've been doing a lot of reorganization of all my podcasts and shows and things like that. And so I would like for you to just like let my viewers know where they can find anything having to do with Decriminalize Nature. And I know that a lot of my people are in Canada, but I do have a lot of folks who deal with ceremonies. So we have a place here in Ontario called Thunder Mountain, and we have a lot of like Manitou Island. So there's a lot of Aboriginal story and entrenched ceremonies here, and vision quests and all of that kind of stuff. And so let anyone know where they can like find you, and maybe we can like have more of our like a Canadian like arm of Decriminalize Nature. But before you do that, before you do that, I actually wanted to your astro chart, like I tell you like your superpowers, and like last night I did a little talk about like vision quests and animals that you see in your visions that are like that function as like companions or guides. In any of your journeys, have any animals or even plants or like any kind of like spirit guides, have they appeared to you in any of those visions or dreams?
I mean, cat-like characters, bear-like characters, probably. I don't know why platypus is always somewhere around.
It's so crazy you brought up platypus, because someone brought up platypus on the live last night. I'm like, who brings up platypus? What is like? That must mean something. That means something.
Yeah, it must be. Yeah, it's like a mixture of worlds, basically.
Yeah. Because
I think the same thing about lava. I really love lava because it's earth, it's fire, it's water.
Oh, you're a Scorpio. That's definitely it, right? Because think about Scorpio is a unique sign because its ancient ruler is Mars, because Pluto rules Scorpio, and Pluto wasn't discovered till regardless if you think Pluto's a planet or not, it wasn't discovered till 1930 something or so. And so there's this concept too of Scorpio feeling fiery, even though it's a water sign. So if you think about that, like what lava is, it's like liquid, like, and also under
it's
the
liquid,
surface.
earth, and fire.
Yeah, under the
Right.
surface. So that I feel like that would be part of your superpowers in some sort of form, like activating the earth underneath it.
I mean, when I paint, I sign it lava because a bunch of my friends used to call me Lava when I was in Hawaii. So
It's a good
yeah,
superhero
it's probably
name,
definitely something like
Larry. It's a good Larry
that.
Lava.
And yeah, right. And for your what's great about this podcast is that we didn't talk about policy barely at all. It's fantastic. Oh,
That's true.
But if you do want to do policy, definitely I can help you out on that. That's definitely something we can maybe talk about on another podcast.
Yes.
But I much prefer these types of podcasts anyway because it's much more interesting and it's something that we can all sort of speculate on together, which is what is this thing called consciousness?
Yeah,
which is beautiful. So if you want to change policy, that's what we do. We passed in 26 cities now across the U.S., 27 cities and counties. It's a really easy process. We'll help out in Canada, get some folks going on there. And then, how to actively engage with your city council, which is really important. If you want to do any integration work, you definitely, if anyone needs to do any integration work, please give us a contact. For Decriminalize Nature, you can find us at decriminalizenature.org. We're going to be putting out our new website probably in the next, or an updated website in the next month probably. Our goal is to have it done pretty soon. And then, or Decriminalize Nature on Instagram, Decrim Nature on Twitter. If you want to find us for integration work or myself in integration work, you can go ERIE, Entheogenic Research, Integration Education. It's ERIE Vision, ERIEVISION.org, or on Instagram or Facebook. And then for me, my personal page is on Instagram, Larry Norris, PhD. So that's a good way to contact and love to talk to anyone about all the things we talked about, plus also learning how to do policy. And really at the end of the day, I said this the other day, it's somebody that, it's our duty to protect consciousness. And there's 100%. Not anyone else out there that's going to do it for us.
Oh, yeah.
So get together, grab your community. This is no time better than now when we're in this sort of fluctuation of paradigms that we're in to be able to say, hey, you know what, this corner of consciousness we need to really stand up for. And I think that's what's really important here, especially when it comes to relationships with plants and mushrooms, that type of thing. So, it's been really great chatting with you, and I look forward to more.
That was a great sign off, Larry Lava, your superhero name. Yes, we will definitely come have you back on and we'll talk a little bit more about policy. I think also like legalese and like that whole language would be really fun to like dive into of that, because everything is just like language and narratives and storytelling. And even as we talk about like the mystical realms, I love that we talked more about like your stories. I learned so much about you, and I love that because you do embody a lot of that energy in how you've like organized Decrim Nature, like the calls that we have with you. You're a great leader for that kind of stuff, and so like truly a warrior of the earth. And so it's been so great having you on the show. I'm going to log off. I'm going to stop streaming, going live, and then I'll say goodbye to you on our little chat. All right, bye everybody, until next time.